work study for
Yes, you said the first and the
for January 15th. And please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Two meetings going on. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. First item is Mr. Bond, and we postponed or continued the property tax abatement discussion on January 18th, the night of the tornado. And I have since talked to the fire chief. He's not going to be here tonight. He's just going to, says his letter, stands that, he has concerns on the effects it has on the junior taxing districts, but he understands what it is the city's trying to do and won't, stand in our way of that, but he just wants us to understand it does impact them. So with that, Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. So it appears that there's a motion on the floor already in consideration of the draft ordinance that's in your packet. This draft, if you remember, came out of a previous work study meeting where alternatives were presented and the council had requested that this version come forward. I think since that time we've had concerns expressed both by the fire district and by individual council members, and so the only thing that I want to add to your previous discussion and to what's in the staff report is that we did talk about this at the Land Use Committee this past week, I guess a week ago Monday, and I think the recommendation was that we certainly need to take a deeper look at this, and there's a couple of other issues that we should consider and potentially, understanding how are we going to handle the next request that comes in. But I think that the question before you right now is what do we do with the immediate request, and whether you want to take action tonight or postpone this as part of a more comprehensive look. This wasn't a project that was in our work program. It was a request that came in that has sort of evolved into a little bit more of a project, and so our ability to really put time into this, if it requires a whole lot more time, is limited until we get through our zoning code, which we're taking to the Planning Commission in 3 weeks. So that would be my only concern, is that if we want a more comprehensive look, realistically April or May is a timeline for getting that done, I think.
And then I think that, and you both, I don't know if anybody else saw that income data.
Mm-hmm.
Was that shared with the rest of the council?
No, I have it. I just, let me see where I put it.
So I can just summarize it. After our land use committee meeting, and then Councilmember Ashby independently gathered this data, I think through PSRC, what we learned is that affordable housing under tax exemption law is based on HUD data. And HUD looks at the entire county, and so Bainbridge Island, Paulsbo, Silverdale are skewing our median income numbers higher than what they would otherwise be. The HUD data also has adjustments based on household size that is not part of the census data, and so they scale things based on how many people are on your household when calculating median income. So what we found is we located some census data that shows that the Port Orchard, the immediate Port Orchard area, has a lower median income than the county as a whole, and so therefore we're providing housing that's affordable to people making 80 to 120% of county median income, as opposed to 80 to 120% of local median income. It may be more like 100 to 140% of Port Orchard median income. And so council potentially, as part of a more comprehensive look at the 12-year abatement, would want to look at shifting the 80 to 120 down to like 55 to 90% of median income to really hit our demographic information.
And when I look at the numbers which are being passed around, I got this through PSRC, and I believe it is by census tract, but you will find the top line is Kitsap County as a whole, that's inclusive of all the jurisdictions, is a little over $68,000 a year. And the city of Port Orchard by itself is within $600–700 of that. We're $67,000 and change per year. And Bremerton is the lowest. The other thing, I just did a quick calculation, and I was taking 60% of the median income rather than 80%, and someone would be making $20+ an hour if and I went back, or we went back as a group, to what was our original intent of the tax abatement, and we had put it in defined areas, you know, what was our intent? So if we're going to expand out of that, does that meet our original intent? Those were the kind of the questions that came out of the land use.
As well as perhaps developing criteria.
Correct, and developing criteria, if we were going to add either a project or a center.
And what I'm hearing from Nick is if we want to have that criteria, it's gotta take a back seat to, we've gotta get this code that we've been working on, done, and to the planning commission, later this month. And, so,
Well, if we look at the intent of this from the beginning, I think that helped drive perhaps the answer to whether we want to take this on alongside or shortly after we set a code. I think code is more important, so I wouldn't advocate for moving this along quickly myself.
okay, others?
I would say what I thought the intent was originally was to encourage development in particular areas. One was the downtown area, and one was up Mile Hill, and then one was in the Bethel from the roundabout to Lund. That's where I thought we were encouraging development. And I will say we have had success because we already have a program on Mile Hill that's now renting, so that took advantage of the tax abatement. And although there's nothing definitive, we have a significant amount of activity spurred by our 640 Bay Street on redeveloping downtown. So I believe our original intent, we were successful in getting activity there. So now is our intent to encourage activity in other areas?
I guess I would ask the question of beyond intent, what's the harm? Or conversely, what's the benefit? I raised a concern about, I think we've done our fair share of affordable housing, but part of the concern I would have in regards to what you mentioned, you looked at the rent in Port Arthur, is what is the, I'm not sure how to put this correctly, the average age of the living units?
Oh, okay.
Because I think we have a lot of what I would consider substandard that might skew those figures down. When you look at some of the housing stock that's been here since,
Or lower income.
yeah. So upgrading the housing stock but maintaining it in an affordable range may not be that bad of a deal.
So is there a desire, if we're to expand this to other areas, is it just the 8-year abatement? I think that was one of the discussions.
I would be fine with that, but I guess I'm not as opposed to expanding the area beyond what our original intent was, and I agree with what our original intent was, but again, I'm trying to look at it from, okay, well, what's the downside and what's the positive side of doing that, and I can see more potential positives than I can see downsides to it.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think we've learned here is that our 12-year right now in its current format is a giveaway. We're not,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah, I
already,
agree.
we're already, so maybe we don't want to offer any more 12-year until we solve that equation, that
Well-
piece of the equation.
And just to refocus on the actual ordinance that's before you, it is contracting the 12-year area except for downtown, where there are other sort of external issues related to cost, and so keeping it downtown isn't necessarily as big of an issue, I would argue, but this ordinance is really just expanding it to that one property, and it doesn't preclude you from readdressing the 12-year issues, or also potentially looking at other criteria for offering this to other individuals in the future, which I should note that I have been contacted by one other developer who's interested in seeing, or interested in requesting this as well, also in the Sedgwick area of the city. And so I think before too long, we do need to have a little bit clearer criteria, but we have an application pending for this project, and my understanding is that it's contingent on the tax exemption, but if it gets approved or doesn't get approved, you know, what action will they take? I don't know for sure.
One other thing that I thought of the other day that we hadn't discussed before is I like this tool for the means of development or redevelopment, but maybe there's something we should put in here that it stays only with the owner that brings this project to fruition, right? Because beyond that, you know, the way these things transact on the open market is really all based on cash flow. And so why would we skew, you know, the valuation by this abatement for someone perhaps to come in 2 years down the road, sell the project, and use the tax abatement as part of the formula for valuation, where if it's already, you know, generating positive cash flow, it's gonna have a valuation, it's gonna have the, maybe that just simply vests with,
I guess coming from, you obviously are, but again, if part of the requirement to receive this abatement is you provide affordable houses, who cares who owns it? As long as this project maintains that percentage of affordable homes for people. I don't know, like I say, Sean, you know more about the whole issue of turning around and marketing a piece of property.
well, it just seems weird to perhaps apply a cap rate to an abatement.
You know, I appreciate what you're saying. To me,
Following
the
the
key
same
word
line.
that you said was, there's a difference between development and redevelopment. So far, in our intent, we've seen development.
Correct, we have not
We've
seen.
seen new
Redevelopment.
facilities, we've not seen redevelopment, and when, you talk about a different scale, having a different scale for downtown, because that's gonna be redevelopment, there's,
Now, maybe that's the distinction we want to make,
yeah,
is it's for redevelopment and not for development. But the other piece that is missing for me is the calculation of, we do not get for 8 years the increased taxes. Okay, how long does it take us to make that up?
there is a, well, that raises not a good question, because you have a piece of property that is generating X, and
Correct,
when the development is finished, it's X plus.
correct.
You could
Plus.
argue in year one.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna get your money back. I just don't know how many years it'll take, but you're.
Yeah, that's my question,
It's a
how,
great
you know,
value.
how long does it take to recoup that?
Yeah.
And you have
Because-
to look at people that move in, and you like.
And the economic
Yeah.
value that they bring.
That ever developed within that 8 years, right?
Right.
And that's the unknown.
And I'm still looking at it from the standpoint of affordable housing.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with development or redevelopment. I mean, I think from a supply and demand standpoint, that the more housing we bring to market, there in itself lends itself to affordable housing. When there's a housing shortage, rents and cost of housing go up. So even new development will play a role in affordable housing.
Jay?
And
No, I just had a question because, I mean, this is my first time through this. And so what other agencies, I mean, the fire, I get the fire marshal.
Everybody.
So, okay, so everybody that's in the,
Yeah, that operates in our buck seven, buck 70,
Yeah.
that's our,
yeah,
the
so we're,
local sliver of the pie. It's us, the school
So
district, the fire
library,
district, the
yeah,
library.
The schools.
Well, okay, you're right, you're right. But it's complicated.
Yeah.
It depends on the type of levy, because the school district passes a
It's a
measure-
fixed dollar amount.
Right.
fixed dollar amount. They get, so they're gonna get their dollar amount.
right, but library,
Right.
Right.
And us, we get the fire
Fire
district,
department,
because they pass theirs on.
Right.
So much per thousand.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
Sean's correct.
But they continue to get taxed at the current rate, right?
So, yeah, we're not taking cost.
The other, piece is for the, not for the fire department, but for the schools in the city, we get does not get the revenue to support this, and they're probably the agency besides our police department that will have the most activity. So, the school district, like you said, still gets their money, and they get an impact fee. So, those are just things that I'm not sure we thoroughly discussed before.
Have you received comment from the fire chief lately? Did you speak with
Yes,
him?
we got a letter, which I shared with everybody, and like I said, I've spoken with him in the last couple of weeks. So he was gonna come to tonight's meeting, and he says, you know, I'm not gonna attend the meeting, I'm just gonna let my letter stand as written. And he goes, I understand what the city's doing, I just want you guys to be aware of,
Right, the
as
impacts.
Beck spoke to, the impacts. And I understand, you know, he goes, you're trying to create economic activity, you're trying to create housing, and it has an impact on us, and I want you guys to recognize that. And I said, I hear you.
And
Can I-
this is a greater service area than just the city limits.
Yes.
Can I also add that, you know, the Growth Management Act under the impact fee authorization, there is authorized a fire impact fee. Currently, the fire district chooses to fund its capital facilities out of its levy dollars and property tax base. But if they wanted to start paying for their capital facilities, whether it's a new fire station out at McCormick Woods, they could, through the county and the city, pass a fire impact fee to collect the capital dollars for growth share of the fire district as opposed to the operating share.
It's true, which is also
I
true.
didn't know that.
And that hasn't been requested, I think, at this district at all.
Really, the only two that are being impacted is fire and library.
And us.
In the city.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes, but as we indicated, when
Yeah, we
we
have
went
a,
in, we start generating more because now the best valuation of that property is assessed at its value, it's not.
and
Fair.
the
Same
more is true
argument
for
we
them
made
too.
for the library and
Yeah.
fire.
All of a sudden,
Right,
you,
right.
at the end of the period, it jumps way up. And I think we need to just, it's important that we, you know, make these, we need to monitor this tool.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Bremerton just went through a big debate on the mayor wanted, advocating to turn it off. I don't think you wanna turn it off, but you need to be mindful, is it working? And I think we need to monitor it, you know, on a, whether it's an annual or biannual basis, you know, is it working? You know, where are we getting this activity, and we getting the activity, the type of activity, and in the locations that we want?
The other question, and I know is challenging to quantify, but there's additional tax benefits to the city in the form of sales tax to the construction and sales tax derived from people, you know, additional populations living here. Granted, there's more expenses that come along with population, but there's additional income as well. And just thinking the sales tax alone on construction should be noted.
I agree with that. But to me, the point you look at is, would those developments, and I'm just gonna say multifamily, it could be single-family residence, it doesn't have to be multifamily. Would those go in anyway, and we would not have to give up our taxes?
But would they go in with that level of affordable units?
If they want to be full in this area, they probably would. Because our 8-year doesn't require affordable housing.
I don't know what the
Which one?
occupancy is at those apartments that were built around Sedgwick and Sydney, but they're not affordable, and they're pretty full. But I don't
But
know
they,
if they're.
no, they're in the $1,200 a month range, are they not?
They're more than that, I believe. I think they're more like 1,500.
Well, probably not for a single bedroom, but for a two-bedroom.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know, I mean, it's a good argument on either side of this thing,
Right.
and it's a tough one to try to get a handle on. We're seeing some increases in our population, which is putting pressure on housing stock, and as you mentioned, if we don't keep up with housing stock, we're gonna have the pressure on rents are gonna go skyrocketing.
I wanted to share one more piece of information, and that is that in the 6 years that I've been here, we've had 3 multifamily housing projects built. One of those received abatement, and so I don't think it's a good example for comparison, but the other 2 are the Sydney apartments and the Sinclair apartments. One of those has commercial and residential on it, but the other one is purely residential, and you're able to look at the assessed value per acre of that project, and we went and calculated it's about $1.8 million assessed valuation per acre. And so one of the ideas that I thought about as part of a more comprehensive update, maybe not as part of the decision tonight, but would be to say that if we're going to give 8-year abatement, you need to achieve a minimum investment threshold of $2.5 million per net developable acre. And that way, the developer is building more units and a nicer project, but the city is also getting a bigger windfall than they would have otherwise gotten under free market conditions at the end of that 8 years. Because if the market right now is, for at least 4 years ago, Rush was able to go in and build something with a $1.8 million per acre valuation. Without abatement, it seems that probably, something close to that probably still works. So if we can, on the 8-year side of things, if we can increase valuation per acre and, help out our long-term balance sheet, that would be a win for the city, but I think it would also be a win for the developer. And maybe that's the approach to looking at this more comprehensively down the line.
And then we're getting the higher quality project, which is
That's because the property was bought cheap.
So we have them, Brandy, can you refresh our memory what the motion, who made the motion, what it is, and
Yes. So the motion on the floor is made by Councilmember Kuchardi, second by Councilmember Rosa Pepe, to approve an ordinance adopting revisions to Chapter 3.48 of the Port Orchard Municipal Code as presented on the December 18th meeting. So I'm not sure if the ordinance presented in this packet is the exact same from the 18th meeting? Okay, so that's the motion on the floor.
So there's public testimony.
There is not. So we have a motion and a second. We've had discussion since then and further explanations from Nick. Is there any further discussion of this?
Just to be clear, this ordinance retains the 12-year downtown,
Correct.
and it changes everything else to 8-year, and it adds the property at Sedgwick.
That's correct.
It does nothing for it doesn't address any other projects that may want to come into the city.
I think it's kind of, I hate to use the language, but kind of a carve-out.
Probably
Yeah,
accurate.
I think we are perhaps trying to attempt to answer a request from some of our community that's looking to develop.
Which is probably not a bad thing, and as we go forward, if we get something else that doesn't stop them from coming in and asking, letting us consider it.
And so with this, I think we're also directing Mr. Bond and his staff, as soon as we get the code developed, that we're gonna readdress this spring and develop some criteria. I'm personally liking what I'm hearing. And that we gonna revisit that 12-year and, yeah, it's not 15 years, 12-year, and put some different income percentages to it so that it truly is
But the 12-year is only downtown.
correct.
Which is a redevelopment, which makes
Yeah.
sense, so.
Yeah.
It's good.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Shank, you,
I'm still concerned that doing this ordinance as presented with the three things that are here would include something that would set a precedent for any other applicants. I don't know how we would be able to turn down future applicants if we felt that their development was what we needed or didn't need. So I can't support this as written.
so Mr. Bond, you wanna address that?
So my understanding of this, and the attorney may want to add to what I'm going to say, but this issue is purely of legislative discretion. There's no obligation, there's no criteria that they're meeting that requires us to grant them a permit if they meet the criteria. This is purely a fiscal policy that you guys are enacting, and you have total discretion. I don't believe that this sets any precedent, though you may want to, after taking action on this, clarify your intent with what happens next, which I would say is don't consider any additional requests until we get our other issues sorted out. And at least then I can tell if the public comes to me and asks, I say, we're going to take a comprehensive look at this and we may open the map, but we need to get other things in order first.
Well, and I was thinking the same thing, when you review the codes, the
22nd. I think the location is a good location. I think with transit and services and, I see more upside than downside.
Yeah, I agree.
Councilmember Dean?
So the other thing we talked about at land use was being able to look at pro forma, and you weren't sure whether we could actually get away with that, but have you been able to look into that a little bit more?
No, I haven't, and honestly, since that meeting, I've been out sick for the entire week, so,
And then, is it available for public knowledge where this second, request would be located?
Off Bravo Terrace, Queensland site.
Bravo Terrace, Geiger, south of Sedgwick.
Behind the, it's the 400 or 500 unit project
Yeah.
that's been on and off for, and their biggest reason they haven't moved forward on that project is, the cost of the roundabout, at, you know, roughly $1.5 million. And all of a sudden they said, well,
You guys aren't using the microphones very well.
so, the challenge of that is their cost of the roundabout.
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah. So, further discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, which is to approve this abatement as, this ordinance as presented at the December 18th meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, motion carries 5-2. We are on to the second item on the agenda tonight,
Mayor.
which,
So, Nick had made a comment about, that we could hold off any future until, does that take
we don't need,
Motion
no,
or no?
we've just given him some direction.
That's right,
We've
okay,
given him
so-
direction that when somebody comes to the front counter
So
there
we-
and asks about this, that we're not considered, the council isn't considering any other
In different locations.
in any other locations
But
until we,
they're fine with these locations.
and until we adopt a new process and procedures for this, so.
Thank you for
That was the
clarifying.
direction that, so, item 2 is the plastic bag reduction, and I did hear back from Josh today, and, the bill drops tomorrow. So I will have a copy of the bill, the proposed legislation, sometime tomorrow. So, sorry, I don't have it for you tonight.
Okay, this was taken to economic development, sometime after the town hall meeting, and we've been working on it. We've, reviewed the county ordinance that's coming forward. Councilman Diener contacted half of the cities or jurisdictions that currently have a plastic bag ordinance. I contacted the other half. We had conversations with them. We did not bring them forward this evening because we knew that there was going to be a bill drop at the state level. And we felt that we wanted to see that before we came forward with any recommendations. We wanted to make sure that what the county was coming forward with, that we were kind of mirroring, was compatible with the state. And if the state does move forward on this, we wanted to be able to take advantage of their outreach and everything that they would be doing to put this together. So I think our recommendation is give us till next work study, because we will, as we found out, the bill's dropping tomorrow, and we'll have the language then to look at.
So maybe it'll go back to the Economic Development Committee when we have the proposed bill, and then back here to the work study in February.
Yeah, we'll look at it at our February meeting at Economic Development, and then make a recommendation and bring it forward at the February work study.
What could we possibly do with it if the legislature is considering a statewide rule? What are we gonna do?
So,
What I heard at their committee was that we didn't want to move forward with an ordinance that was in conflict with what the state was going to pass.
My question is there a need for an ordinance if in fact the state does pass a rule?
Yeah,
Probably not.
probably not, and that's
Why
why.
would we do something until we know what's gonna happen in 1 year?
And I think you're correct, and the reason being is following what the state does, but if it doesn't get out of committee, then
Then we can act,
then we
but
want it to be
act
able to move
before
forward. No,
the state
we're not,
does
yeah.
something
We also heard-
premature.
I think we also heard from Chris that the county was gonna move forward
we see it.
Generally speaking, the state trumps us, so if they pass something,
Yeah.
we could pass something that is for none.
Right.
So that's why we said give us till February, because we wanted to see the bill first. And get some feeling from our lobbyists if it would move forward.
So, speaking, so now this has triggered a thought here. Where are we at with small cells since the federal government stepped in and mucked things up on us? I mean, we spent a lot of time, so we don't want to address that since we're talking about things that higher authorities
Right.
have taken over on us.
Yes, so we are working with Mike Bradley a little bit more to make sure that so he's the attorney that we hired to draft the ordinance to begin with, and to make sure that the revisions that we've put through are in compliance with the FCC order. An attorney from his office got back to me today saying that he has some additional concerns that he wants to make sure we're addressing before we finalize the ordinance, but the latest is that I've sent back some additional questions to him to see, where do we stand on this? How quickly do we need to get this in place? But it is something we're trying to keep pushing forward, and then once we have Mike's input on that, the plan, I believe, is to send it back through to the industry representative we've been working with to get one more pass industry input before we bring it back.
So coming back to a work study, or do you think are we ready just to adopt? I think we've beat it to death, other than we were ready to act on it, but then the FCC stepped in.
Yeah, and so the FCC rules have been appealed, I understand.
Right.
And if those appeals or that appeal is successful, then does that influence our direction as well?
It may, yes, exactly. So, and we received another, Mike Bradley is working with other attorneys to provide input from cities that they've worked with on this, to sort of try to claw back some of the local control over all of this. So that's something I did specifically ask Mike, but I certainly will find out from him what he believes the timeline, or what he knows the timeline to be in terms of this appeal, and how that will affect ultimately what the city decides to do.
Sorry about that sidebar, just
Well,
triggered my.
Is that the same as G5's rollout, or is that a different issue?
I think it's all kind of,
The same?
5G, yeah.
yeah, it's all part of the same discussion, yeah.
It's connected for sure.
Okay, all right, I'm ready to move on to number 3, which is utility fees and penalties. So we had a request to waive some late fees, and the council was ready to take action on that. Noah did some research with our insurance company, and they recommended that we not do that because our code would not allow that, they didn't believe. So Noah has brought forward for your consideration the code change that may address this in a proper manner. So I'll let you read it for a moment. Or do you want to read it into the record, maybe?
Well, yeah, we can read it in the record, and I guess the point where I want you guys to specifically read,
Okay.
it's really the second whereas. Whereas it is in the best interest of the city to authorize the finance director or his or her designee to waive utility late fees and penalties, disconnection charges, and to make alternative utility payment arrangements under the following conditions. So again, the whole goal of this resolution is to provide a framework in which we could consider something, and here are the 2 pieces that we're able to consider. Where a utility count has been active for a minimum of 12 months, and where a utility count has not been delinquent in the previous 12 months. So the important point is that if a customer comes in and requests us to waive a late fee, we can look at their account and see that they first been an account customer for at least a minimum of 12 months. And then the second caveat is that they have to have a clean record for at least 12 months in order to qualify for a potential late fee waiver. If any of those 2 don't qualify, they don't qualify for the late fee waiver at all. And then the last, whereas, point C is really to help us address making payment arrangements. We've had some customers call us in advance and say, hey, I know I'm not gonna be able to make my payment on the 25th, but I can make it on the 27th. I have a check coming here or there. Is there anything the city can do to work with me to give me an extra day without going to water turnoff and incurring all these additional late fees and charges? So the third whereas is, again, intended to provide us some flexibility when a customer has been a minimum of 12 months and in good standing, that we recognize circumstances do occur from time to time in our lives, and there is some flexibility there.
I was voting already, sorry.
Councilmember Deere?
I was curious about the logic to include disconnection charges in the,
I think that relates to C, because we could be in the process of turning somebody off, but they're calling and saying, hey, don't turn me off, I get my check
Right.
on Thursday, and we're gonna turn them off on Wednesday.
I was thinking complete end of service.
How late do you have to be, how delinquent do you have to
Yeah,
be to
that's
get something shut off?
Could you, is this 1 month and only 1 month, or do you get to ask for 2 months or 3? I mean, if you're asking for.
So your bill, okay, so you get your bill about the first of the month, and it's due by the 25th, I think it is.
Right.
And if you're past the 25th, then you get a late charge. And then I noticed they're about the first month that I call them Valentines. They're little door hangers that are pink, and they're not Valentines, they're disconnect notices that
Door hangers.
the door hangers, yeah. And so they go out and deliver those, and then there's a window from when that hanger goes on, your doorknob, to when we're gonna come. It tells you have so many, 10 days, I'm
Right.
thinking. That when we hang that on their door knob, and most folks pay
So
before
that's
that
only
happens.
their delinquent, their bill's due on the first, they haven't paid by the 25th.
It starts a process.
So it's not
It's
even
more-
a day.
No, it's your,
really
yeah,
fast.
it's pretty fast.
I'm just wondering if you're delinquent after 1 month, you can apply for this and get it.
Well, I go to the first condition, or have you been a customer for a minimum of 12
Right, right.
months? So if you meet the conditions,
Right,
then you could apply for it.
right.
And I guess the intent is to only waive once under these conditions. So if they come back the next month, you'd say, no, deny.
So it's a 1 month.
Yes, because you have to have
One time in a year.
delinquent
Okay.
for the consecutive 12 months.
So maybe you need to include language that says in any 12-month period, or.
Well, I thought I achieved that in point B, where say utility account which has not been delinquent in the previous 12 months.
So if
I
you're,
see your point though, that we may need to say it hasn't been delinquent and we also haven't received a waiver in that 12-month period.
Well, so that'd be a different, okay, so I'm glad we're talking about that, that's different. So the reason we didn't go that route is we thought, well, if you're a customer, you've been with us for 5 years, and maybe 5 years ago you were delinquent and we waived it. Do we want to penalize you 5 years from now, or do we want to still allow you to be able to apply for a waiver? So if you start to put different timelines on it as you can do it as a one-time waiver, one time per account, and that's it, one and done.
No, I was thinking it was once per 12-month period, so you don't have somebody coming in every month asking for a waiver.
But I think
But-
you've addressed that, because if you did it
If you asked for
once,
last month, your last 12 months
haven't been clean.
Correct.
So 1
That's
month.
right,
Correct.
that's right,
So that's what the word delinquent.
Yeah.
yeah.
so when I read this, is C unnecessary? Because you have to meet the standard of A and B to get to C. Why have C?
Because it has to do with the payment arrangement scenario when,
But why would it matter? Just take that out. Let's take about the payment scenario, right? Because you have to meet A
Right.
and B.
I guess
So
the
regardless of how you
scenario
did it,
is, I'm not waiving
waiver,
fees.
now you still
Yeah,
qualify.
C's I'm not necessarily waiving fees. I'm working with the customer to delay the turn off and shut off, and when those fees would come into effect. Because they're notified us in advance, or the other two they're kind of coming after the fact, fees have been applied. Hey,
that
you
was
guys
to
work
Cindy's
with me.
question, the disconnect fee.
C gives them more time.
C gives them more time and actually puts more onus on them to A, track their bill, I recognize something's gonna happen in my life, I'm giving you notice, so I'm not late yet, but I'm gonna be late. And this happens generally around Christmas time. I'm gonna be late, can you guys help me? And currently we just don't have that. No, and then if you say no, then you get to the stage where now they're late, incurring late fees, and I suppose you could go back and do it differently, or you kind of work with them on the front end and say, yeah, we'll give you to the 27th rather than 25th. That way we're not sending out crews to do turnoffs, putting on door hangers, putting on files. So we're just managing it a little differently, a little customer.
So
Yeah.
if you play this out, then you would get for 1 month, one-time deferral every 25 months, right? So you get 12 months, you've been in good standing.
expensive to print the disconnect notice. And to set Public Works, you know, guy that could be out fixing a sidewalk is out hanging hanging things on doorknobs.
Can you give me an example of what a penalty is versus a late fee? You have listed your utility late fees and penalties.
Let me see if I can pull this up.
They're finance terms, John.
A late fee is a penalty, but semantics.
Yeah, they are semantics, but there is a difference though.
There
It's a
is.
good- There is a good, I'm hoping I can pull this up.
Where would you get a penalty in addition to a late fee?
The deed slip is your penalty. Yeah, so it's $15.
That check fee. Yeah.
I can come back, let me come back and answer that if this goes forward next Tuesday. And I'll bring a more complete answer.
Yeah,
All
I'm
the ones.
curious to know what we're
Yeah.
waiving.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So you want this on the agenda next Tuesday? Okay. And so that gives the tool to, I know there was a desire to take care of that one account on that apartment building, and the fee was fairly large, so.
Because what happens is it multiplies. It
Right,
does.
it's 10%, and 10% of my bill versus an apartment building is a different number,
Right.
much larger.
You know what, if you come for the report next week, just let us know how often this happens. Like how many accounts, you know, is it a couple a year or?
Well, up to now, the only one that could waive it was the council, we've heard one.
Okay, so it's just one a year or so.
Yeah, we get the requests a lot,
Utility,
but for different reasons.
Okay.
And we were trying to narrow the scope of when we would find it acceptable.
Well, there may be
Kind
some
of
we
what
never
conditions.
heard of, so.
Some people are just gonna pay their late fee, and they're not gonna come in and ask.
Yeah, like,
Who has the authority to waive the late fee?
finance director.
So we'll pay it.
Or his designate.
With- After this is approved, what is it now?
Right now, nobody has an authority.
That's my point in responding to Fred, how many times has this happened?
I meant how many times has a
come to the
request
council?
come up?
right,
Yeah, not how many times that's happened, how many times
A lot.
have people asked, okay.
A lot.
That's what it
yeah.
is.
Well, I'd ask every month.
No, you
That they're-
wouldn't.
People
Doesn't hurt to
ask.
ask.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The repeat offenders will ask every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Billing is every 2 months.
Yes.
And so, you know, keeping track, it's every two months is, you know, that's a different kind of cycle. And sometimes those could be pretty significant bills, especially when we raise the stormwater rates. That was pretty shocking for some. So, all I'm saying is, you know, this gives the finance director just a little bit of, we can have a little bit of grace. We don't have to be so heavy-handed. There are citizens, especially when someone's trying to resolve something 12, 16-year history of paying on time. You know, one little thing like the mail didn't come. I said, man, we should be able to have grace to do something about that.
Well, we're about to fix that.
We just are.
Well,
Aren't
not
we?
till Tuesday.
Wait till next Tuesday, that's right.
So if I sell my house and move away, is there a disconnection charge for that as well?
No.
Okay.
It's when we turn your service off, we have to do that, and we charge a fee for that. And then there's gonna, there's a
Whoever buys
reconnection.
your house wants to turn the water back on, should be in for a surprise.
Don't you usually have to take houses?
We don't usually,
No, we still charge you for sewer, but we don't charge you for water if you don't use it.
all right. We're on to the next item, I believe, which is the countywide planning policies. Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. Tonight, I was hoping to check in with the city council. I'm on the LUTAC group at the KRCC, that's the Land Use Technical Advisory Committee. It's made up of all the planning directors within the county, the tribal representatives, the military, Department of Commerce. There's a handful of people on this group, and we make recommendations on land use to the KRCC board. We have been asked to update element C of the countywide planning policies, and first of all, I apologize that you got the entire countywide planning policy document. I only intended for you to get element C, which was like 3 or 4 pages, so hopefully nobody spent too much time reading all the extra material.
What page is it that we want to look at?
You are looking in the countywide planning policies.
Page 13 of their numbers.
Yes.
13.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, 54 to 113.
There you go. So, where we're at on this is our our countywide planning policy, local centers policy. And so this is an interlocal agreement between all of the jurisdictions in Kitsap County on how we handle our centers. What has happened last year, the Puget Sound Regional Council adopted a new regional centers framework, which is going to be a major component of Vision 2050, which is the 4-county region growth strategy. And so we are working to integrate the new PSRC policy into our local planning policies. The criteria that PSRC has created, essentially they've always had these really high-level centers, which are Bremerton, Silverdale, and what was previously known as Skia. And those had criteria previously, and they still have criteria now, though they've been updated. When it came to local centers, which is also a major component of our Vision 2040, our regional growth strategy, it was more of a free-for-all, and each county was handling these things differently. And you probably remember when we were applying for Tremont funds, there was a big discussion about whether our local centers had to be listed in the countywide planning policies or whether they had to simply be designated in our comprehensive plan. And so PSRC decided that they wanted uniform standards for all 4 counties so that when we're competing for regional funds, whether it's for the regional centers or for countywide funds through PSRC, that we're all playing by the same rules, and that they're making investments in projects in support of the regional growth strategy, and then all of us have bought into that regional growth strategy. So this past Thursday, I attended this LUTAC meeting where we started talking, or we continued our discussion about these policies, and it became apparent that the county's position on things and the city's positions on the issues before us are quite different, and I felt it was necessary to check in with the city council to see what direction you wanted me to take this and how you wanted me to represent the city in these discussions, which of course this will be voted on by the board, but we're drafting these policies. Yes.
I'm gonna need some clarification,
Yes.
and I don't know if it's going to come from you or if I'm going to have to contact someone else. But I was at a KRCC executive committee meeting today, and there was a report on your LTAC meeting. And whatever the conversation was right now, I'm having trouble bringing it forward, but I specifically asked, I said, LTAC is, in the countywide planning policies, updating the center's area, correct? And I was told no. They were not looking at the centers until Vision 2050 was done.
And that came from the chair, or?
Yes. It came from the chair, and I'm trying to think who else was, specifically from the chair, but everyone else that was there was agreeing, and I'm going, that's not what you and I talked about.
Well, we have we had a meeting in November, December, and then last Thursday where the planning directors are actively drafting an update to the centers policy in response to the action that PSRC took, and to hopefully bring all of our terminology and our centers criteria in line with the regional strategy. So, and county representatives were there as well. I don't remember which commissioner is currently chair, but.
It's a mayor.
Oh, it's a mayor.
Non-commissioner chair.
Gotcha, okay.
So I will clarify that, because I didn't want to.
Yes, and I will say,
Just leave it at that.
my counterpart from Paulsbo has been out on sick leave and has not been at the last couple of meetings, and so there may be a disconnect there.
There may be a disconnect.
All right. Any other questions?
So, where are we?
Well, I'm confident that we're going to draft a recommendation for the board. Whether the board chooses to take action on it or not is up to the board. In any event, the thing that's become very clear to us in these discussions is we understand how PSRC is handling these centers criteria, but we're really concerned about what level, how much attention we need to pay at the countywide level to how we designate these, because there are potential funding implications both at PSRC, but there's also the implication as a county is how are we holding each other accountable? And if, you know, for instance, if if there was a project in Silverdale outside of the regional center and the county wanted to designate an area of Silverdale as a local center so that they would score better on a PSRC grant application, but maybe they're doing something in that center that's totally inconsistent with our regional growth strategy, you know, do we allow that to go forward, or do we have criteria in the countywide planning policies so that everybody's sort of playing by the same rules and moving in the same direction? So I think I've broken the staff report into really 4 questions, and I think to break down the first question, it's really, I don't think we have a choice when it comes to PSRC, whether we get additional points for following the center strategy or not, but how much does the city council, you know, want to support countywide funding being directed to projects in support of centers above other types of projects within the county? I mean, is that a priority for you? Because and I should point out that on page 39 and through 40 of your packet, we have criteria both for countywide centers and for local centers. So there's really 2 types of centers, and countywide centers are above local centers in the pecking order. And so if something's a local center, it doesn't score as well as if it's a countywide center. So most cities in the county probably want as many countywide centers as possible so that they score better on transportation funding applications. But at the same time, there's conditions that come with that, such as you have to have zoning in place that supports urban development of minimum intensity. You have to have affordable housing strategies. You have to have all these other pieces that go away, that come along with this prioritization for funding.
So is there pushback by LUSAC or some of the other electeds on prioritizing funding of centers over non-center funding?
I don't know. I don't think the conversations occurred at the board level, but I'm getting the impression from staff that at least if you look at Appendix F, which is on page 103 of your packet, this is the current list of centers. I think the thing that you'll notice is that Kitsap County has 3 local centers, and while this is a 2004 list, and Port Orchard actually has quite a few more that aren't on this list yet, I think Kitsap County, because it has not made local centers plans in its comprehensive plan, is going to come out worse in the countywide funding competition because of that. And so I think that they don't want, at least when we're looking at transportation projects at KRCC, they don't want to be disadvantaged because they are not centers or because their centers don't meet these criteria. They want to be able to get they want to get their centers on the list without having to work too much for it, and that's my impression.
So they want to score better even if they don't have urban levels?
Well, Silverdale, remember, Silverdale and Central Kitsap and the Port Orchard UGA are urban growth areas, as is Kingston. But I know that the county has Silverdale as a regional growth strategy, which plays in a different pool of money. But as far as countywide centers, if you look at this list, they have Kingston, which I think is a legitimate either countywide or local center contender. But Squamish and Southworth are both rural and don't meet centers criteria.
So then taking this to the next level, how has PSRC talked about the county's approach to Southworth and Squamish, which Squamish has a tiny commercial core, and Southworth has no commercial core?
I'm hearing a conversation in a room that's saying, well, we think that these are guidelines, not rules, and the PSRC is saying, no, these were adopted, and it's, essentially these are the criteria for getting funded. And I guess, so the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is that the council members who serve at KRCC need to take a position on this as we go forward, because right now I think we're stalling out as planning directors because we don't have that level of guidance. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to discuss it and share your thoughts with me.
So you're giving Beck and I and Jay as our alternate, our marching orders, and how strong is our position?
And things that I would say is that the county, and I don't know if all of the county commissioners are supportive of this, but the county representatives on the technical level feel strongly that the scoring criteria for countywide funding should be more, should contain more regional equity. more dollars based on their population, on the regional equity for population.
AKA sprawl.
But, I mean, Suquamish is just a very curious choice for a center.
Well, the other thing, if you look at that, because these were put together in 2004.
Right.
The definition of centers were different, and Southworth is here because it's a transportation hub, because of the ferries. Okay, so I'm supportive of the work that LUTAC is doing to define our centers. What is a countywide center, and what criteria do you need to meet to be classified as a countywide center? And then what are your local centers, which may have a different level of criteria? And your countywide centers, I would assume, are going to have public transportation involved. And that's where we want to focus our density. And that's where I think we would want to focus our transportation dollars. And
Although Southworth is not necessarily an area that I think many people, or maybe some people would advocate for density.
correct, correct. But when the fast ferry goes in, there, some things may change. What I'm supportive of is a definition in our CPPs that says, this is what you have to do to be a countywide center, this is what you have to be a local center, and when we're doing transportation funding, if you're a countywide center, you get 2 attaboys. And if you're a local center, you get 1 attaboy, and if your transportation is not within any center, you don't get an attaboy, you're just there, okay? I think they should be tied together. I may be a lone voice, but that's kind of the way I think it should be. Now, Silverdale, which is this last funding cycle where the county asked for most of their money, is already a regional center. And if we were to ask for regional dollars, they're gonna score high. Our county, if you're a countywide center or local center, you're not gonna score regionally at all. But, and then
That's why we didn't get any money for Tremont, from
Right.
PSRC.
it's just really hard to make a nexus between, and that's why Bainbridge Island scores quite well on regional monies, because they always partner with the Washington State Ferries. And the Washington State Ferries, with the connection to Seattle, they score very high. So anyway, I'm supportive of what Nick is trying to do, because I think there needs to be, and I would think that some of the other agencies would want to see funding go where there's more density.
Or transportation.
Yes.
Well, what I'm liking is that there's uniform criteria for everybody.
Yes.
And
Yes.
nobody's gaming it.
Right.
Yeah, and countywide centers should not be prioritized over.
Well, over local?
Yeah.
Well, I think right now at PSRC they will be. I think it's really whether we as a county, escalate those to a higher priority. And as a county, we say our policy is we want our regional centers to develop, we want our countywide centers to develop, and we want our local centers to develop. And then there's development elsewhere as well, but our 3 priorities are these centers, and they're in order of importance.
What I'm hearing is, again, it's dependent on which bucket you play in.
Yeah.
If you're playing in a regional, then the county centers are gonna get
Yes.
priority. If you're doing county allocation, then it should be equal.
Correct.
What I'm
Okay.
hearing.
But
So-
I think the criteria should be defined.
So concerning the criteria on this PSRC list, there's a table here that is for the countywide centers. The other question is, do we want criteria above and beyond this? And for instance, one of the recommendations in here is to be a countywide center. PSRC recommends that you have a sub-area plan in your comprehensive plan, that you've looked at transportation, utilities, all the pieces of being a sub-area. And right now, our local centers, we don't have any that have really good sub-area plans. That we have a county campus plan that's, very limited in our comp plan. We have some downtown policies, but other than that, we're a little bit weak on that. But if we really are trying to prioritize this and we want people to really make this effort, you know, you can add additional criteria to this list, but you don't have to. And so that's the second part of the discussion is, you know, are there policies regarding, you know, residential densities? Right now it says you only have to have 10 activity units per acre, which is either a job or a housing unit. That's actually, you know, that's pretty low, even based on what our current zoning standards are. And so, do you want higher thresholds than this? There's nothing to stop you from doing that. And do you even want us to explore that, or should we just use the PSRC default?
I think it'd be a victory to get the first item.
Okay.
And all of us to agree to that.
Right.
Versus complicating it. Or
Sure.
bringing more issues to the table.
That's the next round.
All right. So the next item on the list relates specifically to our centers, and I did pass out a handout that has a table at the top and several maps. And so in our comprehensive plan, we've designated 10 local centers, and they're called local centers in our comp plan, and we're gonna have to update the terminology. Based on these PSRC criteria, some of them are too big, some of them are too little to be countywide centers, but they can all be local centers. And so my question for you is, and I think I know the answer to this, but my recommendation would be to get as many of these designated as countywide centers as possible. However, we're gonna have to go in and trim some of the boundaries on these because a few of them are too big. Our industrial park is not going to be eligible as a countywide industrial center because it's too small and we don't have any area to expand to. So that one has to be a local center. But I think at McCormick Woods, for instance, right now the center boundary is on both the north and south side of Clifton. I think realistically that needs to be entirely on the north side of the road. And so I think as part of our comp plan amendment process for this 2019 cycle, I'd propose to open up and edit these maps so that we fall in line with these criteria and then change the terminology to match the PSRC criteria so that when we're on this list, all of our ducks are in a row as far as grant funding applications. And so that may be done before the county finishes this work, or it may be done after that work is done. But in any event, I think we should be looking at it concurrently and trying to get ahead of that for the next funding round. Is everybody okay with that?
Why the comment about limiting the center to the north side of Clifton?
So if you look at the area, if you look at the table at the top of the handout, which I didn't keep one for myself, look at the acreage for that.
427.
The maximum is 160 acres to be a countywide center. And so it's far too big, and the idea is that your local centers or your countywide centers are supposed to be walkable, and when you're that large, it's considered beyond what most people, it can still be walkable, but it's a much further distance across the center than what they're trying to plan for in terms of transit.
But on the north side, those,
I would think there'd be more density on the south side.
Well, McCormick North was always planned as being the commercial hub right there at the corner of Campus Parkway and Old Clifton. And so that seems to me to be the heart of it. But McCormick North also has multifamily zoning, whereas McCormick West is all 8 units per acre type zoning. So, and there is the church out there, and there's 1 or 2 other properties along Old Clifton that potentially could take a different form here. But I think most of the plans are for the north side of Old Clifton. And so that's just an example. The same thing would have to happen at Bethel and Sedgwick. I think we would potentially not go quite as far down Geiger. We'd have to shrink that boundary a little bit, or potentially split it into 2 centers that are slightly separated. So I think just the maps need to be moved around a little bit so that we hit both the planning targets for activity units per acre as well as the size thresholds in this regional criteria. If there's,
Comfortable with what Nick's, I thought I heard. Affirmative.
okay, and I think we've actually, I think those are most of the issues that needed to be discussed. Just going back to the comment about the counties like Southworth, it was pointed out in that meeting that the county is also eligible for rural funds that the cities aren't able to apply for, and so they have other pots of money as well for those types of projects. But I think what we're going to see likely as part of the next comprehensive plan update cycle for the county is that they need to look at their UGAs and do more of a centers-based approach to planning, whereas right now they were looking at the regional centers, but but in terms of looking at local centers and developing local sub-area plans in the county, in central Kitsap, I think, you know, in order to be competitive for funding in those areas, they're gonna have to do that work as part of their next update.
You know what parts of Kitsap County is designated as rural, eligible for those funds?
Well, it's anything outside of the urban growth boundary. So Kingston's an urban growth boundary. There's some UGA associated with all of the cities. Bainbridge doesn't have any UGA. It's the whole city is the island. And then there's Central Kitsap and Silverdale, and everything outside of those areas is rural.
And would be eligible for the rural funding?
Potentially.
Because they're not in a UGA.
I appreciate that, but I thought it was very, very limited to just basically the north.
No, everything, I mean,
What kind of funding are we talking about?
well, there's rural town centers funding, rural town centers and corridors funding, which is a set aside at PSRC. I think it's 5% of the total amount. And so that's one option. But there's a whole nother side of funding outside of PSRC that's available in rural areas. It's not available in urban, which includes CDBG type funding and other sources as well.
And I believe they're eligible, although I can't say they always apply, for some rural funding out of the Peninsula RPTO.
So anyway, I think I'm on the right track, it sounds like, with the planning directors, assuming that we are going to continue working on this. And I will continue to advocate that we do want to prioritize investments in our centers and in support of our centers based on the hierarchy that exists. And I will try to get as many countywide centers as we can get.
Are we running alone on this, or are we getting support from the cities?
Well, as I mentioned, Paulsbo was at the first meeting and was preliminarily talking along the same lines. Bainbridge is an island, and they're not taking a strong position one way or another. And I think Bremerton is generally supportive, though I think they're hesitant to take on any additional criteria or planning requirements because just of workload type issues. And so they recognize the center's policy and want to continue down that path without doing a whole lot of extra work to get there.
The other thing with Bremerton is they have not been for the last 2 years part of KRCC, and they're just back in, so they're just getting back up to speed.
Okay, thank you for the direction.
Okay, we're on to item 5, which is the McCormick Woods impact fee. And this has been an ongoing issue. Remember we annexed McCormick Woods for 10 years ago?
Almost 10 years ago.
Almost 10 years ago. And there was a pot of dollars that, and I think it's about $400,000 that we've been politely asking the county to send to us as part of that annexation, and they have not. So it's gone through a number of administrations, and the idea is here that we would send them a bill. They have no, part of the criteria, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, they need to have a project in their 6-year tip to be eligible to use these dollars on. They don't have any projects in that area in their tip. So they don't have anything they could put it to. We have a roundabout we'd love to find some additional funding sources for, that's one leg of it goes into the county. There's some politics associated with this bill we're going to send, we would propose to send. If we don't get any response from the bill, then we would follow up that bill with a letter from our land use attorney. So,
Have you asked Commissioner Dorito about this, or,
yes,
and it's been just silence?
yes.
Okay. I assumed you had, I just was wondering what the
We've
response was.
asked multiple times.
Yeah.
Well, they can't use it on Silverdale.
They cannot.
No, this money is specifically earmarked, and even if we get the money, we can spend a certain amount on one project, a certain amount on another. It's very prescribed in the development agreement. But at this point, our thought is that if I've heard Alan Martin or Noah say it, he receipts and disperses, and there's a contract, and it says this money is due. And I'm just hoping that a finance guy is gonna recommend that the bill be paid because it's contractually obligated.
What's the interest rate there?
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, the money's been gaining interest, and so last year when we checked, it was 390 and change, and now it's up to 402. So I think we get the balance because that money is encumbered for specific projects. Probably, yeah.
Could have.
Go forth and do good.
Yes.
All right. Bill is going in the mail. So, all right. On to our last business item, or work study item. You remember, as we were developing the budget, so our police chief is going to retire here in the next few months. And we planned for that in the budget. I talked to you guys as we were developing the budget. We had discussed a recruitment process with Prothman, which is a recruiting and placement firm. And the cost for that was a little over $23,000 plus expenses, so we budgeted $25,000. Over the holidays at various meetings, I meet with other mayors at other meetings, and I was talking about we're getting ready to start a process, and previously Sheriff Simpson had recommended an organization called the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, and he said you should check into that. And Mayor Erickson, we're talking to her about us starting a process. She says, well, I used that very organization. They ran a phenomenal process. And so Deb Howard and I reached out, and we met with Mike Painter with that very organization. We left that meeting thrilled with the process that he outlined. He here a year and a half ago ran Paulsbo's process, does about 5 of these, I believe, a year. He did the Lacey's in the last few months. Our overall costs, depending on how many out-of-state candidates, his initial fee was $2,000 plus his expenses. If we had no out-of-state applicants, the cost process should cost us about $7,000 and no more than about $15,000. I've since signed a contract since it was within the budget. The process he's defined, depending, once again, in-state or out-of-state, at least 4 months, if not a 6-month process. I'd like to, as you see in this is a draft, and I would encourage you guys to give me your comments on it. I really like the ideal candidate profile on page 3. But just get your comments back to me. Deb Howard has been working on this, and this is really, she's also retiring this year, and she's going to be very missed because she does good work. The process he described includes interview panels, 3 separate interview panels, a group of community members, a group of peers, which would be the directors, and then the mayor's panel. Those panels would then make a recommendation of some finalists that we then turn do a community reception. And so the community, the council, the police guild members get a chance to interact. We get to see a chance with them interacting with our community. From there might be an additional interview of a candidate or 2. I'll come back to this. One of the things he discussed is Lacey and Paulsbo also paid up to $2,000 towards travel expenses. They both hired out-of-state candidates, and when they negotiated those contracts, there were some modest moving expenses included in those contracts. 2 things that he's pointed out. One is, we have a candidate probably locally that doesn't meet one of our minimum requirements, which is a 4-year degree, and I just want to make you aware of that. That's a council policy. It's been in place for a long time, and when I asked the consultant about that. He said we should not, he did not recommend. This is a, a high skill level position, and that he feels that that is a very appropriate to happen in there, but I just want you to make you aware of that. He knows of at least 4 local people that he thinks will apply. I've heard similar things, not directly but indirectly. The one things he believes we're lacking is our salary range. Our salary range is 126 to 146, and based on his professional opinion, he thinks the low end is fine, that our high end needs to be about 155 or 160, and our ideal candidate is probably somebody that is a deputy chief or a senior command position at a larger organization, and they're going to be a chief for the first time, most likely. And we're not going to start them at the high end of the range, but it's important to have that growth potential. And Bremerton, I'm told, had a salary. Well, they have a salary range of 129 to 157. They're a much bigger city than us, and when they did the national search, they got an internal candidate and 2 external candidates. They ended up hiring the internal candidate and then signing a contract larger than the salary range to get that person to take the job. I hope to see, and he believes we will see a pool of a dozen or more candidates if we have an appropriate salary range. So that's what I guess I would like to get this out on the street by the end of the month, but it will take council action to amend that salary range next Tuesday for me to meet that deadline and to get us in that 4 to 6 month window. And so I just wanted to get some feedback from you, what you guys, I think he's probably, what I've read about other positions have been hired out there. Now Bainbridge Island is different than us, and we all saw that the chief just left there for banning, and he was making 190 plus other benefits that took him over 200,000. We can't compete with that at all. But I do feel that we in the last 3 years we have as an example, in our other not directors but other managers that we've hired, that we have definitely raised our skill level here at the city, and I think this is an opportunity to raise the bar in our police department if we get a real good candidate. So that's my pitch to you.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first one is, I'm remembering a few years ago, we had, and they may have retired by now, but we had a police employer or employee who was making more money than our chief. And we passed a resolution that the chief would always make a certain amount more. So,
We corrected that
okay.
problem with the salary survey we did a couple of years ago. You're correct that, yeah, he had to make, I think that was even when I was a council member.
I just wanted to make sure
It's been a
whoever we
while.
brought in was good to
Yeah.
be making more money than.
Yes, and we should, this will help with that, yes. And that was because the command, which is the deputy chief now, was a sergeant, and because of all of their longevity bonuses, made a considerable amount of money. And there's a union position. The chief and the deputy chief are not union positions, so it's a little different. So, is there any objection? What's the right number? We kind of assumed 155. That's what we put in here in this draft. I'm not sure 160. We need to go 160, but I do believe the professional opinion of the consultant that the 146 probably is low.
Is that a 5-year range that you talking about?
Yes, it is a 5-year range, isn't it?
We'll have to take a look at that, especially because if you keep your low at where it's at now, adjusting only just the high side, that changes the scale, right? So I think what we're trying to get mostly is an indication if you guys are comfortable with the high 155. Our recommendation from the consultants, rev out that area, and then
5 steps.
And inconsistent with kind of the prior arrangement with the second command, so that they're above that person, we don't violate that. So we have to take a look at it, make sure we're gonna get the 5-step, inconsistent with the prior direction.
Do the salary survey look at benefits as well?
The salary survey was literally looking at, it didn't look at the chief specifically.
No.
It was a citywide salary survey of all the positions. And so, and it was only, okay, you have the representative, which they're bargained, and then we had the non-representative. And what happens at times is we want to check in to make sure that, in comparison to our peers, that we're not falling behind, or in some cases, certain positions were ahead of the market rate. So we adjusted those salary ranges and we hadn't done, the salary survey before that had been 10 years maybe, which is too long, right? But we went through an economic downturn.
Situation, it didn't look at all of those forms of compensation, like healthcare, leave.
So Mike Painter's opinion was on pay, salary, but did he also look at benefits to see if that was commensurate?
I mean, we have, our benefit package is our benefit package. I mean, our healthcare, our insurance.
I think they're all pretty
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah. The Bainbridge Island was unique. He had negotiated, I understand, a contribution to deferred comp in addition to his salary. If we have an out-of-state candidate, we may get a request to add, for them to have some relocation expenses as part of that initial contract, but that'd be a one-time thing, correct?
As far as an annual salary, I think, it's a cliche, you get what you pay for, but, I think we need to attract good quality department heads, so I'm okay with it.
Jane?
No, exactly what I was gonna say. I did a question. Do we require to live in the city?
We don't.
Okay, I was curious.
We're looking at 2 department heads.
Oh, I was looking at chief of police, for reasons.
It's nice.
County would be nice too,
It'd
or
be nice.
adjacent county.
Which one? Yes. Both sides of that argument.
So,
So the low end, we're talking about a range.
mhm.
So we have to know that we're going to hire this person in at a certain level that will be higher than the deputy chief.
Yes.
And then we have to give our chief an opportunity to grow.
Exactly.
And so what do those numbers need to look like? Right now, our high, I believe you said is 146, which is what the mayor is making, or the.
That's not what the mayor's making. Not even close.
So, if we added 10 to that, I have no problem at 156 or 155. I have no problem, because we're not paying that right now.
And we shouldn't be for at least 5 years.
Right.
And-
Well, and I think your comment that you made, that more than likely, we're gonna get a high-ranking assistant chief.
Right.
And this will be the first opportunity as a chief, which brings them to start
Right.
mid-range. I don't think anybody's gonna walk in here, I'll take a job for 60,000.
Yeah, and then 126 may not be a realistic, when we start that negotiation process, this person might be making 130 already at their current job. And they might be moving here from somewhere else. So it's gonna, we're gonna negotiate, we're gonna identify a candidate, we're gonna do background checks, polygraphs on them, and then after we pass those steps, we're gonna negotiate a contract. And that's why this takes 4 to 6 months.
The beauty of that, though, is that you have a known candidate to set your negotiation based on skills and experience and so on.
Yes.
So,
Correct. Okay. Mr. Dean?
So you had asked about where we are with code earlier. I'm gonna ask, where are we with the Anchorage and delinquent mortgage code?
I asked that today. Matter of fact, I asked that the derelict boat
Derelict,
ordinance, and we're gonna talk to one of the sergeants and hand that project off. Because I asked that very question. I said, where are, there's just been some other issues that have taken precedence over, forgot about that, have we? And so, one of the sergeants, he's probably gonna hand that to a project to one of the sergeants, and, I think it's gonna be, what I heard is that we got a pretty complicated process, and it needs to be something simpler. We're not having to, people don't have to register, that we're trying to discourage activity out there in Sinclair Inlet, in particular in the winter months. You know, we want recreational boaters to come here and visit, and it's okay to anchor for a few days out in the bay, even if you don't come into the marina, but we want people using pump-out facilities. You know, maybe coming into town and spending a couple of dollars would be desirable.
Isn't that, once again, something that I thought I heard somewhere that the state was dealing with that?
There's 30 days, you can be 30 days, and they don't have any resources at
Well,
all.
that, I heard that they were asking for more funds, but they were also asking for some modifications to be able to deal quicker with derelict vessels.
Okay. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah,
You might want to ask our
Lobbyist.
lobbyists to see.
to me, you have the recreational folks that will just come in, put out their anchor and stay for a day or two. And they're fine. Then there's an issue where you may have people put out their anchor and want to live there, be liveaboards out there.
Correct.
And I'm not sure whether we want to encourage that.
And have other liverboards tie up and not understand anchors and stuff.
Right, and then you have the derelict boats, so there's three different things, and, you can't make it so onerous for the recreational folks that they don't come in.
Right. No, exactly. So less is more, I think, is what
Yeah.
the discussion we had this morning. So just a couple of, just want to make you aware of a couple of things. I'm out of town at a AWC event next Tuesday and Wednesday, so Beck will be running the council meeting. Sean's already asked to be excused.
Is that in Puerto Rico?
It is not. It's in Olympia. So, big city of Olympia. So so only one of you can get the flu between now and next Thursday, or we won't have a quorum. No, only one. So that's all my next Tuesday. No, two of you, then you don't have a quorum. So other things that'll be on the agenda is the Rockwell Park. We got a low bid, just under the engineer's estimate. It's the same contractor that has the pathway contract in McCormick Village Park. So, and if the council approves the contract on Tuesday night, they will start construction on February 1st. And update on McCormick Village Park, I saw a change order on that today, and so the posts have been, we got a discount on the cost of the materials because the posts have to be cut off, move that playground structure over, and they only want to mobilize once because it takes a couple pieces of equipment to lift the thing up. So we're about 3 weeks out, and the park, we'll be able to open the park back up, so, because that structure will be repaired.
So are we moving that one piece of equipment out?
No, we're just moving it, there's a swing that's too close to the concrete wall.
That spinner piece of
Yeah,
equipment?
there's one piece of it that just can't go there, and we're gonna take it off, and we're probably gonna put it at Gibbons, we think. And then the whole thing was just placed too close to the concrete wall, and if a child fell off the structure, they could potentially fall and hit, and they land on a concrete wall instead of the engineered chips. And so we recognized that immediately and said, hey, we can't have this piece of equipment be used. And so initially, we just put caution tape around on it, but it didn't stop anybody from using it, so then we closed the park. So, that's all I have. Anything for the good of the order?
Yeah, so Sean has advised that he's got a scheduling conflict, moving forward now for the first Monday of the month. So what would it look like if we could shift to the fourth Monday of the month? Same
For land use.
For land use, yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Any Mondays are good.
Right, that reminds me, utilities, Fred, I didn't read your email yet. Were you available to?
Not on a Wednesday. You can get someone else for the next review.
So we're good with fourth.
Yeah, can you,
9:30?
let Carrie know and she'll get the schedule changed? So this is a permanent change?
Yes.
Okay.
So just quick question, do we have business that we need to act on next Monday or?
February.
Let's,
Yes, 'cause 18th.
let's hold the date on the calendar, and if we can put it off, we will, but the end of February is a long ways off, and we are taking the zoning code to the planning commission on the 5th, so presumably we may have something to talk about in the way of the zoning code update, which I think will be on the website on Friday, the final draft of it. So if that's available, we may want to just meet to talk about that briefly.
Dawson's got something for the good of there?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, actually, you had a conversation on an unrelated subject with Commissioner Crew. She indicated that she's organizing a visit of tiny homes in West Seattle, Bonner area, and she wanted me to extend the invitation. If anyone is interested in going, they're gonna take a van from a locally known organization that I'm familiar with, and take the Southwood Ferry. It's about a mile from the Southwood Ferry, or the West Seattle Bonner.
It's the 24th.
Go visit these tiny homes, see, so if anyone's interested, reach out to Charlotte. It's coming up here fairly soon, but I don't.
I think it's the 24th,
If you're
Thursday the
interested.
24th.
And one last tornado update. Small Business Administration is here all week. I met with them out at Bethel Square. They're out documenting business names, addresses, contact information to get a hold of these folks. And there is no federal, our costs, I want to say, I saw the final number, this is overtime to staff, and it was about $26,000 was our costs associated with the tornado those few days. So we're nowhere near that $10 million threshold.
Us in the county.
Have you charged their time to it? Oh, no. We're good.
And so anyway, they're on site. But there's also resources available through the small businesses. So it'll depend on what the programs and so on and so forth. So anyway, they're here and they're out meeting with individuals. The latest number I've heard is 10 homes that are in the county that won't be habitable ever again, that will be torn down. 7 of those 10, I believe, or 8 of those 10 are mobile homes in that first little subdivision. And then, and Mary Ann's wasn't the house that got split. She's the next one over. She was out on her.
Does she still live back there?
Yeah.
Yes, she does. Noah and I went for a drive after the Chamber of Commerce luncheon. I took him through the area, and Mary Ann was out on her doorstep talking to Charlotte and somebody else from the county on the Lowe's project day. And so I chatted with her for a minute. And she does have damage to her roof, and stuff came in through the ceiling, but hers isn't. I assumed it was the one more over that was totaled, was split in half and totaled, and it's not. That's not hers, but she does have damage. And the Chamber of Commerce went very well. I spent too much. I didn't perform time management very well. I did add a slide of that. Got to there, and when I got to, so I spent too much talking about all of our success, and when I got to goals, I got the hook. So I got to talk about goals about that much.
Certainly good things about it.
But yeah, it was very well received.
Can you put that on our website?
Slideshow?
Yeah.
You bet.
Is there any update?
What colors are you using?
Beautiful house. Excellent.
So Fred was asking about the Bay Street path, so it's particular, what's your question about the path?
The completion of segment 9, is it, or segment 3?
Segment 3, so the same so because of the cold weather and colder wet weather, the paving window really isn't until April 1st. So the challenge was gonna be, even if we got it paved, as we build the pocket park, we would have to protect it. And so the nice thing is we have one contractor that has both of those contracts. So he will build the park and then pave it. And so I believe we will get it about April-ish, April 1st. Both projects will get wrapped up together, and we'll cut one great ribbon at a new park with the pathway.
Have some photos of the cracking and.
Yes, they're
That's
addressing
gonna be
that.
dealt with?
Yes, yep. So there was, where they rotor hammered into the wall to anchor they got aggressive with their rotor hammer and cracked the wall. So they're gonna have to cut sections of it out, so. By the Marley, and then there's two other spots, so along the pathway, but yes, and we had some vandalism down there too, so unfortunately. Anything else?